are places I remember all my life, though some have changed.
As any person knows living in Liverpool, you're actually born with the Beatles in your life. They're in the streets, the clubs, the statues, the pubs, the landmarks, the museums. And their music, it's always been about the music. It's just a way of life. You're brought up knowing all about their music. It's just something you learn about without really trying. It's strange to think of a group of young boys who met as teenagers, and from that meeting, they'd go on to write their music and inspire the world. It all started at St Peter's Church Hall, Woolton, Liverpool, on 6th of July 1957, when a band met a new member and a legacy was created. Woolton and Allerton were areas of Liverpool known well to the young Beatles in the late 50s. It was where they lived and went to school. The church summer fair in the grounds of St Peter's happened every year. A young John and Paul will have attended this fair every year with their families and friends. When we look at a map of the area, we see how close their homes are to the places they wrote about in their later songs.
It surprises me how over the past few years it has developed. I've worked here for 13, 14 years, and since that time the interest has only grown. And it surprises me the age groups coming. It's not just people of more senior years. It's young people in the teens, 20s, still fascinated by the Beatles and their music. I appreciate that St Peter's is a big part of that Beatles story. It's a very important part for those people who visit Liverpool. I mean, we have people coming in here and I'm being in tears at being in the hall where John and Paul first met. Eleanor Rigby's story is quite fascinating. I believe Paul McCartney first explained it away as Eleanor Rigby was taken from the actress Eleanor Bron in the film Help, and Rigby was the name of hardware store. Subsequently, I think he did say that subconsciously he may have seen the grave when he was playing here in his youth. I've lived in the Liverpool area for nearly 60 years, and only since I worked here you really realise the connection that Woolton has in the Beatles story. Obviously, as being brought up as a teenager, it was the Beatles music that and the Mersey sound that sort of dominated, so you're quite well aware of that. But working here has just highlighted the importance of the Beatles to Woolton, to Liverpool, St Peter's.
In 1959, the then Quarrymen, including John, Paul and George, performed the opening night of a new social club for teenagers, the Casbah. Mona Best owned the Casbah. The club started its life as a basement den for Mona's teenage sons Pete and Rory, and being an astute businesswoman, Mona soon saw the potential, and the Casbah Coffee Bar was open. The club was teetotal, just a place to listen to music and dance. It was a rave success with the local bands, and when the newly renamed group, the Beatles, needed a drummer for their upcoming gig in Hamburg, Germany, it was Mona's son Pete Best who joined them.
Fantastic memories. On the opening night, we didn't know what to expect, but we soon found out. There must have been, well, I would say 2,000 people there turned up. Obviously, they all couldn't get in because the club will only hold, well, I would say we got 1,000 people into the club, but that's about all it would hold. I mean, then it was absolutely chock-a-block. And at the end of the night, Mo said, one night a week will not be enough. Pete joined the Beatles and they went off to Hamburg. I think it was within a day. The change in them was absolutely fantastic. I've never seen such a change in a group ever, and I probably won't see it again in my lifetime. What happened in Hamburg is, as I said, they were lacking something, and that something was a drum beat. And as soon as Pete joined the band and they really got cracking with playing, everything gelled with them, and the drum beat was that fitted in perfectly. I was working in Woolton at that particular time, and I used to get off for my lunch, get the number 3 bus into town and go to the cabin. Just to come back, and I stunk. I mean, you couldn't lie about being to the cabin because everybody could smell you a mile off. You stunk of disinfectants and sweat, smoke, the whole lot. But Pete just dealt with it as normal, and I just dealt with it as normal. It was, I didn't really pay much attention to it. At that particular time, the Beatles were Pete's life, I mean, because they were out playing lunchtime sessions, evening sessions, either here, or the Cavern, or the New Brighton Tower. So Pete played, well, he played for a lot of gigs, and fantastic.
On the 9th of February 1961, the Beatles played their first lunchtime session at the Cavern Club at Matthew Street. This was at the beginning of the Mersey beat scene and the start of what would become Beatlemania. The Cavern Club was an underground warehouse that was just like a cave. They say the walls would be wet, pouring with sweat and condensation. The air was full of smoke, and it was dark with loud music. But the young people loved it. They only went to listen to music and dance, the new rock and roll music of a generation. This was all they lived for and craved. Footage shows hundreds of people crammed into these small underground rooms with no complaint because the music was unbelievable and the atmosphere was so electric.
The interest in the Cavern and the Beatles will never ever go away. It just keeps getting bigger, to be honest with you. Here at the Cavern, we're open 7 days a week. We've got live music 7 nights a week, in fact 7 days. And the beauty of the Cavern is we're a major tourist attraction, but we're still a thriving live music venue. I mean, since the Beatles, it was the Beatles obviously that put the Cavern on the map in the early 60s, and after that, certainly as a direct result of that, a lot of the big American artists wanted to play the Cavern because, you know, that's where the Beatles started. And they're not doing it for any commercial reason. It's usually because they want to tick, it's the bucket list, you know, we've got to play the Cavern. Will any of the surviving Beatles ever call into the Cavern or doing it? We don't know. We don't know. And this is the beauty of the Cavern. Twofold. One, the Cavern will continue forever and ever and ever, you know, regardless of whether Sir Paul McCartney or Ringo comes, because it's the spiritual home. The legacy of the Beatles is in Liverpool is here for everyone to see. There was always this thing years ago that when the Beatles made it in 1963, they did their last gig in the Cavern. There was always these, the Beatles left Liverpool. But if you fast forward to where we are now today, the Beatles never left Liverpool, you know, and that is the legacy of this real industry that we've got in Liverpool now.
The Beatles played many pubs and clubs around the Liverpool area, from the early days in the Casbah to touring Hamburg and then onto the Cavern. They built up a massive following of local young fans in Liverpool. Things began to change for them when they were introduced to Brian Epstein and he became their manager. The Beatles went from a famous local band to a worldwide craze. Their music was being played all over the country. They were on the radio, the TV, and in every newspaper. They were everywhere you went. Then their music hit America, and the world began to experience Beatlemania.
We were 4 guys that I met Paul and said, "Do you want to join my band?" You know, and then George joined, and then Ringo joined. We were just a band who made it very, very big. That's all.
John, Paul, George, and their new drummer Ringo all lived in the south of Liverpool. The influence of the places and the areas they grew up around later became words and titles of many of their well-known hits. Everyday names that the people of Liverpool were used to. Now it seemed very strange that the whole world was singing about places such as Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane. The concept of a Beatles-inspired hotel in Liverpool has been prevalent amongst Beatles enthusiasts in the city since the late 1980s. It only came together in 2004 when hotel plans were finalised. From the early stages, the objective was to create a unique environment that offered high-quality hotel facilities with an exciting and interesting twist in the clever presentation of a theme that would be both subtle and challenging in the way that the incredible story of the Beatles was told. In 1988, the Albert Dock redevelopment started, and it was planned to be the newest tourist area in Liverpool. In 1990, the Beatles story moved to their new and larger premises within the Albert Dock on Liverpool's waterfront. This year they celebrate 25 years as the largest Beatles museum, with many original items of memorabilia from those glory days in the early 60s. It is visited daily by tourists from all over the world. This helps the legacy to continue, and a new era of fans are introduced to the music of the Beatles.
Been trading for 25 years at the Beatles story. What keeps the interest fresh in the Beatles? Pretty much the back catalogue. Most popular band in the world discuss. I think they are, and they're pretty much current. Young people are still listening to their music. Paul McCartney's still touring and having hits. Ringo's still touring. So pretty much as fresh as ever. Not quite Beatlemania of the 60s, but getting there. Now you can imagine with the diversity of visitors, we get all sorts of questions asked about the Beatles. From is this the real white piano that John Lennon used on Imagine? You know, from have the Beatles visited to are the instruments we have on display real? So all of those questions are frequently asked questions, so to speak. I guess the items in the exhibition that create most interest, and I'm going to say emotion too. One, George Harrison's first guitar, because that was the beginning really of the guitar player from the Beatles. But the room we're in now, the White Room, so many people stop here and shed a tear, and I guess it's to do with all the welled up emotions for what the Beatles meant to them, but also the passing of John Lennon. Could Liverpool do more to promote the Beatles? As the man who runs the Beatles story, I'm always going to say yes to that. But we do work in cooperation with the Tourist Board, with the Mayoralty here in Liverpool, in something called the Beatles Industry Group. So the Beatles story, the Cavern guys, the Hard Day's Night Hotel people, all work together to promote the city and the Beatles' legacy. But I'm pleased to say 25 years on for the Beatles story, we've had successive record years of visitor admissions. So we're doing our bit, but we could always do more.
The city of Liverpool has been left an amazing legacy by the Beatles. The whole city's touched by them. Around every corner is evidence of how the Beatles have had an impact on each corner of the city. From the moment you arrive at the city's own John Lennon Airport, you can see how they've touched the people, the tourist industry, the nightlife. They are everywhere. Most of all, they are in the heart and souls of everyone who has ever lived in Liverpool or just passed through on a visit. Just to take a look at the city in 2015, look around and you can almost imagine you were back in the 1960s when it all began. The city of Liverpool produced a famous band, and the band gave their legacy back to the city. This has now made Liverpool a major tourist attraction and entices visitors every year to come in their thousands.
I said,